If you've ever played a game of Risk or followed the news during an international crisis, you've probably come away with the idea that international politics is a brutal game. States competing for power, no rules, no trust, just interest, alliances, and betrayals. That's the basic worldview behind realism, one of the most influential theories in international relations, and one that we cover in another video. Realists argue that because the international system is anarchic, meaning that there's no world government to enforce the rules, every state is ultimately on its own. In that kind of world, survival depends on power. In such a world, cooperation is rare and peace is temporary at best. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the world isn't condemned to endless competition? What if peace isn't just a dream, but something that can actually be built? As a theory of international relations, classical realism challenges the realist worldview. It starts from a different place entirely, a belief that human beings are capable of reason, progress, and cooperation, and that states can be too. According to liberal theorists, peace isn't just a fantasy, it's the result of powerful forces, democracy, economic interdependence, and international institutions. In this video, we're going to explore classical realism as a theory of international relations. We'll look at its Enlightenment roots, its key assumptions about how the world works, and how it gave rise to one of the most enduring ideas in global politics, democratic peace theory. We'll also ask some hard questions. Does the spread of democracy really make the world safer? Or is liberalism sometimes used to justify power in more subtle ways? As a tradition of political thought, liberalism emerged during a period of profound upheaval in Europe. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Enlightenment thinkers began to challenge the dominant institutions of their time: absolute monarchy, hereditary privilege, and tightly controlled mercantilist economies. In their place, liberal thinkers proposed a radical alternative, a vision of society centered on individual freedom. Liberalism holds that human beings are rational, capable of self-rule, and entitled to certain fundamental rights simply by virtue of being human. Across its many forms, liberalism is grounded in a set of core principles. Individualism, the idea that the individual, not the king, not the church, is the basic unit of political life. Liberty, meaning freedom of thought, expression, and action. Equality before the law, and a belief in limited government, that political authority must be restrained by constitutions, by law, and by the consent of the governed. Liberal thinkers also argued that free markets, not state monopolies, create prosperity and foster cooperation, even across national borders. And they believed that human progress was not only possible, but achievable through reason, education, and careful design of institutions. One of the earliest liberal thinkers was Hugo Grotius, a 17th century Dutch jurist and diplomat, often called the father of international law. Writing during the chaos of the 30 Years' War, a brutal conflict that devastated much of Europe, he sought to imagine an international order grounded not in brute force, but in reason and law. In his landmark work On the Laws of War and Peace, 1625, Grotius argued that even in a world without a central authority, states could and should be bound by shared moral principles and legal norms. He drew on the idea of natural law, suggesting that certain rights and obligations existed simply because we are human. This was a foundational move towards a more rule-based international system, an idea that would later be central to liberal internationalism. Grotius also introduced the concept of freedom of the seas, challenging monopolistic empires and asserting that certain spaces, like the seas, should be open to all. In doing so, he laid the groundwork for a liberal vision of the international system and a society of sovereign states, equal under the law, capable of peaceful coexistence and cooperation. In the 17th century, the English philosopher John Locke would develop several foundational texts of liberalism. Writing in the wake of England's Civil War and overthrowing of the monarchy, Locke advanced the revolutionary claim that political authority is not inherited, but rather granted by the people. In his second treatise on government, 1689, Locke argued that all individuals possess certain natural rights, including the right to life, liberty, and property, and that governments only exist to protect those rights. Locke contended that when a government fails to protect those rights, the people have the right to overthrow them, a philosophy that would be called on during the American Revolution and echoed in the Declaration of Independence. Indeed, the idea of limited government, grounded in individual consent and accountability, would become a cornerstone of liberal political thought. Locke's ideas also laid the intellectual groundwork for later liberal claims about sovereignty, legitimacy, and self-determination in international relations. If individuals are entitled to freedom and self-rule, then so too, liberal theorists would argue, are nations. Indeed, while Locke and other Enlightenment theorists did not make these connections, these principles would nevertheless echo centuries later in anti-colonial struggles and in efforts to build a more just global order. While Locke focused on rights and political authority, Adam Smith laid the economic foundation for liberal thought in his groundbreaking work, The Wealth of Nations of 1776. Smith argued that free markets rather than state-controlled monopolies were the key to prosperity. Smith introduced the idea of the invisible hand, that when individuals pursue their own interests in a competitive market, they unintentionally contribute to the public good. For liberal thinkers, this insight had powerful implications not just for economics, but for international politics as well. Smith believed that economic interdependence could serve as a force for peace. When states trade with one another, they become materially invested in one another's successes and more reluctant to go to war. Commerce, in this view, doesn't just generate wealth, it simultaneously builds bridges between nations. This belief, that trade fosters cooperation and restrains conflict, remains a core claim of liberal international relations theory. From Smith forward, liberals have argued that open markets, not military might, offers the surest path to global stability. Building on the political and economic ideas of thinkers like Locke and Smith, Immanuel Kant took liberal thought in a new direction, developing a bold and systemic vision of peace between nations. Writing in the aftermath of Europe's dynastic wars, Kant asked a profound question. Could the world be organized in a way that would make war not only rare but obsolete? In his 1795 essay Perpetual Peace, a philosophical sketch, Kant proposed that enduring peace could be achieved if three key conditions were met. Republican constitutions under which governments based on the rule of law and public accountability were established. A federation of free states, which Kant described as an international system where states agree to resolve disputes peacefully. And the observance of cosmopolitan law centered on respect for rights of individuals, not just states, including principles like hospitality and freedom of movement. For Kant, peace wasn't just the absence of war, rather it was a system that had to be built through institutions, laws, and shared norms. His insight was that republics, or what we might now call democracies, are less likely to go to war with one another because their leaders are accountable to the citizens who bear the cost of that conflict. Kant's ideas would become the philosophical foundation for what we now call democratic peace theory, the observation that democracies rarely, if ever, fight wars with one another. And his vision of a federation of states under shared rules foreshadowed the creation of international institutions like the League of Nations, the United Nations, and the European Union. It would take more than a century, but Kant's dream of perpetual peace ultimately found its political expression in the aftermath of World War I, with the idealism of leaders like Woodrow Wilson. Speaking before Congress in 1918 as World War I drew to a close, Wilson laid out his now famous 14 points, a plan to reshape the international order around principles of openness, justice, and peace. Wilson called for open diplomacy, freedom of navigation of the seas, removal of trade barriers, and most importantly, the principle of national self-determination, the idea that people should have the right to determine and choose their own forms of government. At the heart of this plan was an international organization, the League of Nations, designed to provide a forum for conflict resolution and collective security. For Wilson, this wasn't just an idealistic call for world peace. It was a practical response to the catastrophic failure of old power politics. He believed that war could be prevented not through balance of power, but through international cooperation, democratic governance, and the rule of law. Yet the liberal vision Wilson promoted was also deeply flawed. The United States never joined the League of Nations, and while self-determination was offered to parts of Europe, it was denied to colonized peoples in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Still, Wilson's legacy is significant. It marked a turning point, the moment when liberal ideals moved from theory to practice in global diplomacy. Wilson's ideas helped inspire future efforts to build international institutions and promote democracy worldwide. And ironically, while Wilson's vision excluded much of the global South, it was precisely these liberal ideals, so inconsistently applied, that would later be taken up by anti-colonial leaders demanding independence and equality. While liberalism emerged in Europe as a challenge to monarchy and mercantilism, its promises of liberty, equality, and self-determination became tools of resistance for colonized peoples in Asia, Africa, and beyond, many of whom used the language of liberalism to demand their own freedom and sovereignty. In fact, the rhetoric of self-determination Wilson helped popularize would echo powerfully in the voices of those he excluded. Take Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian poet, philosopher, and Nobel laureate. A fierce critic of nationalism, Tagore nevertheless embraced liberal humanism, advocating for global cooperation, cultural exchange, and a world based on mutual respect rather than domination. He criticized Western powers for failing to live up to their own professed ideals of liberty and human dignity, and condemned European imperialism for betraying liberal ideals. Sun Yat-sen, the leader of the Chinese Republican Revolution, similarly drew on liberal values in his call to replace dynastic rule with democracy. His 3 principles of freedom, nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood, reflected a distinctly Chinese interpretation of liberal modernity, adapted to the conditions of colonial encroachment and internal fragmentation. And in Africa, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of independent Ghana, invoked liberal ideals of self-determination and political equality in the fight against colonial rule. Yet, Nkrumah also exposed the contradictions of liberalism, how Western powers promoted liberty at home while denying it abroad. For him, the decolonization of Africa was not only a political project, but a moral demand grounded in universalist claims of liberal thought. The resonance of liberalism lay in its promise of universal rights and government by consent, values that colonized peoples embraced to hold empires accountable. But liberalism was also contested and reinterpreted, often blended with socialism, nationalism, or indigenous traditions to create new political visions beyond the Western model across the global South. So while liberalism began as a distinctly European philosophy, it became a global language of emancipation, and its greatest impact, arguably, has come not from those who originally authored its principles, but from those who demanded that those principles be universally applied. Now that we've explored the intellectual roots of liberalism, let's shift to focus on how these ideals inform classical liberalism as a theory of international relations. It's important to remember that liberal IR theory starts from a fundamentally different view of the world than realism. While realists see the international system as dangerous and anarchic arena where conflict is inevitable, liberals take a more optimistic view. Indeed, unlike realists who see humans as selfish and power-seeking, liberals believe that people are capable of reason, cooperation, and moral progress. And because states are made up of people, the same logic applies to international relations. Liberalism doesn't deny that conflict exists, but it argues that war is not inevitable. States can learn, adapt, and build systems that reward cooperation and discourage violence. Liberal theories also argue that the type of government matters. Democracies, with checks on executive power and public accountability, are less likely to go to war, especially with one another. This idea becomes central to what we call the democratic peace theory, which we'll explore in detail in another video. Further, when states trade with each other, they become economically intertwined. War, in this view, threatens shared prosperity, making peace a better option. Free markets and commerce, then, aren't just economic tools, they're also peace-building mechanisms. Finally, liberals believe that even in an anarchic world, institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, or the European Union can help states cooperate, share information, and resolve disputes peacefully. Institutions create rules, reduce uncertainty, and encourage predictable behavior. In other words, classical liberalism sees a world where reason, rights, and institutions matter. It offers a framework for understanding how peace and cooperation are possible, even in a world without a global government. While classical liberalism offers an optimistic vision of international politics, one grounded in reason, rights, and cooperation, it's far from immune to criticism. In fact, liberalism has been challenged from multiple directions by realists, critical theorists, Marxists, and postcolonial scholars alike. First, critics argue that liberalism underestimates the role of power in conflict. Realists in particular contend that liberals paint too rosy a picture of the world. States still pursue their interests, and wars continue even among states claiming to promote liberal values. Cooperation, they argue, is fragile and self-serving. Marxist and structural critiques argue that liberalism ignores or masks deep economic inequalities built into the international system. Free markets don't always lead to prosperity. They can also produce exploitation, dependency, and uneven development, especially for formerly colonized countries. From this view, liberalism isn't a path to equality, it's a justification for capitalist domination on a global scale. We'll explore some of these criticisms in another video. Postcolonial scholars note that liberal ideals, like freedom and self-determination, have rarely been applied universally. Western powers promoted democracy at home while sustaining colonial rule abroad. And even today, liberal rhetoric is sometimes used to justify military intervention or regime change. For its critics, a sharp contrast emerges between liberalism's promises and its practices, one that fostered deep skepticism in much of the global South. Again, we'll explore this critique in greater detail in another video. Another challenge lies in the very definition of liberal values. Whose vision of rights, freedom, or democracy counts? Liberalism is often assumed a Western model of political development, dismissing or marginalizing alternative systems of governance, values, or community. This has raised important questions about cultural imperialism and the global legitimacy of liberal norms. Although classical liberalism first emerged in the Enlightenment, its influence is anything but historical. In many ways, liberalism continues to shape how global politics is conducted and how international problems are framed and addressed. Institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the European Union all reflect key liberal assumptions that cooperation is possible, that rules matter, and that conflict can be managed through dialogue and institutions. Liberalism also continues to guide how many states, especially in the global north, approach foreign policy. Concepts like democracy promotion, human rights, and free trade are often framed not just as strategic goals, but as moral imperatives. At the same time, liberalism is under pressure today. Rising authoritarianism, democratic backsliding, global inequality, and skepticism about globalization have all called liberal assumptions into question. Critics argue that the liberal international order is in crisis, or was never truly liberal or inclusive to begin with. Still, despite these challenges, classical liberalism remains one of the core frameworks in international relations theory. It provides a powerful tool for imagining a world where cooperation is possible, where institutions matter, and where peace can be something more than just the absence of war. Whether as a guide, a point of departure, or a target of critique, classical liberalism continues to shape how we think about international politics today. So, where does this leave us? Classical liberalism has shaped how we think about peace, cooperation, and the role of institutions in international relations. But it's also a theory with limits, ones that often reflect the interests and experiences of those who first developed it. That's it for now. As always, please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.